Dr. Rajan is here. Dr. Sridevi, can we start with today's session?
Yeah, we can start.
Hearty good afternoon to all. Welcome to our 11th session. Today we are having a topic on respiratory symptoms and it will be taken by Dr. Rajam Iyer. So we can start with ma'am's presentation. We can have it for around 40 to 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of discussion. By 4, we can have our case presentation, followed by its discussion. We can wind up our session by 4:30. Thank you all for joining in. Over to Dr. Sridevi.
Thank you all for joining in once again. And Raju, before going on to session, I hope we can forward all the materials of last two sessions as early as possible, right? Just as a reminder for every one of us. So, moving on to today's session, today we'll be talking about management of breathlessness or other respiratory symptoms in palliative care. As I've mentioned in the group, and Dr. Arjun already have had a session for us on communication skills, and she's a pulmonologist from Mumbai. She works in two major hospitals in Mumbai, and she is trained in palliative care from Trivandrum years back. And since then, I think she is very active in the field of palliative care, and she has been an invited faculty for many of our sessions and many of the workshops happening in and around our country. So I texted in the group that it's really important to discuss whatever issues you want regarding respiratory symptoms, because it's very different when a pulmonologist is talking about palliative care. So welcome once again, Rajan.
Thank you, Sridevi. This new look suits you. Okay, so is Rajalakshmi, you will open the presentation or should I? I can handle it from here, but you can open the presentation.
Once if I open it, I can only control it, ma'am.
Okay, so I should open it. Okay, 1 second. Yeah. So, what is this group of people? All doctors, nurses, all over the country? How does it work?
Yeah, so these are all doctors, and majority of them are from Catholic Health Association of India, CHAI, and most of them are non-doctors working in very different parts of the country. Most of them are in very rural areas where they have limited healthcare facilities, and they are the only treating physician in and around a few kilometers. And some of them are from outside, but all of them are doctors.
Okay, fine. Great. So good afternoon and thank you for joining in. I know I'm still getting used to this Zoom talkings. I really like the didactic lectures where I can see people in front of me and also see the way they are understanding and let it be an interactive session. So whatever questions you all have, please do discuss it, put it on the chat. And if I'm going too fast, stop me so that we can have a session which is interactive and you understand what I want to communicate to you. So let's begin this afternoon by one of the what the main topic is going to be, the palliative care approach for respiratory symptoms. I'm audible? Everything is clear?
Yes, ma'am, you are clear and it is audible.
Okay. So today what we will go through is the need for palliative care approach in respiratory diseases or for respiratory symptoms. What is chronic breathlessness syndrome, which is one of the biggest chunk of respiratory condition, which is seen not only in patients with respiratory medicine, but probably in all our patients or quite a few of our patients requiring palliative care, irrespective of the condition. A little bit about morphine, and then we'll go to other respiratory conditions. So the need for palliative care in respiratory medicine. So if you see this little statistics about the number of Indians and the way they are affected by various diseases, you can see a bulk of infections, a bulk of conditions is TB, COPD, asthma, diarrhea, lower respiratory tract infections, diabetes, heart disease, stroke. And cancer forms a small percent of it's not I mean, it's 0.15% of the Indians, but if you see the other number of affected diseases, which is non-cancer or non-communicable diseases, they form up to 35 to 45% of Indians were affected by it. That means these are the conditions which also require palliative care. For a long time, historically, since palliative care was focused only in treatment of patients with advanced cancer, somehow the non-cancer conditions were neglected for palliative care approach. And the importance of this slide is to focus on the fact that non-cancer condition also require palliative care. And there is a need, because if you see the number of Indians affected by these conditions, there's quite a bit of people percentage wise who are affected by these conditions. Okay. So the statistic shows that India has 18% of the world's population, but it has 32% of patients who are suffering from chronic respiratory diseases. And if you see the disability allowance for daily allowance for disability, it is almost double of our population. So the burden, the global burden of chronic respiratory diseases, India is 1/3 of the global burden. And it is also worsened by our aging population. There is a statistics or prediction that the rise of 60-year-olds is going to go up by 300%, and that of 80-year-olds is going to go up by 700% in 30 years. Shall I continue?
Yes, I request all to stay muted. Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
So we must.
सुनीता आवाज के लिए डील के साथ कर रही है हम।
Dr. Eileen and Pushpa, can you just stay muted?
ऐ सुनो तो जी, इधर आओ तो एक जन, यहीं पर करना है।
So we need to realize that by the year 2050, the number of elderly population we'll have is going to be a huge amount, and that is going to add to our burden of patients who are going to require palliative care, not just with respiratory symptoms. So coming to the numbers of why we need to focus on respiratory diseases and respiratory symptoms, 75 million people worldwide suffer from breathlessness, of which more than 90% of patients with respiratory illnesses, that is 65 million people around the world have conditions which advance lung diseases, and almost 90% of those patients suffer from respiratory illnesses. 50% of the 10 million patients with incurable cancer also have breathlessness, and also 50% of the 23 million with cardiac disease. So like I told you before, breathlessness is not just a symptom which is associated with respiratory diseases. Patients with incurable cancer of the lung, breast, or just because of anorexia, cachexia can be breathless. So it is a big part of advanced cancer. Also patients with cardiac disease, patients with degenerative neuromuscular disease where the diaphragm is involved also are breathless. So breathlessness can be anxiety can cause breathlessness. So breathlessness is one of those symptoms which is affected across the systems. It's not just focused on respiratory diseases. So what are the causes? To tell you some of the causes of breathlessness, one of course is the lung. So any advanced airway disease, advanced interstitial lung disease, congestive cardiac failure, advanced neuromuscular conditions like motor neuron disease, advanced cancer with pleural effusion or lymphangitis carcinomatous, or like I told you, any cancer with cachexia because of severe muscle loss, patients do feel breathless because they're deconditioned. Now, I'm sure all of you are very familiar, I'm not sure about with this particular graph. This shows you, if you divide the population of the world dies in these 4 manners. So first is the sudden death, where the person is absolutely fine and then the person suddenly dies. And typically this happens, unfortunately, in less than 10% of people. So almost only 7% of people die like this. The second thing is that sudden deaths most commonly happen under the age of 50. Once you're above the age of 50, it's very rare to have sudden deaths. Second trajectory of death is terminal illness, like how you have with any particular cancer, where you have suffered a terminal illness with a decent quality of life, and then with an advanced illness, you slowly and steadily, your quality of life dips till you reach death. That is the second graph of terminal illness. The graph that we need to worry about and we see very often as a respiratory physician is that of organ failure, where the patient is diagnosed with an advanced lung disease like a smoking related lung disease or interstitial lung disease, and it probably in COPD the patients live with that illness for 10 to 15 years. So you see that their whole life after the diagnosis is a slow dip. Every time they get admitted, it could have been it's an acute event that could have led to death, but modern medicine pushes them back to alive, but they never reach their original quality of life. So they are slowly and steadily withering away, wasting away, and with increased number of dependents, increased number of hospital admissions, their quality of life is decreasing till they reach death. So these are the patients who require a lot of hand-holding and palliative care support, because it's not just physical symptoms, it's social, psychological, emotional, financial, and the family and the caregiver. All of them go through a lot of stress with each hospital admission. The last trajectory is that of elderly, frail people, where they are only old and they slowly wither away. So if you see that the non-cancer and the patients with other system diseases like respiratory, like cardiac, like neuro, they are the ones where the bulk of people are affected, and they are the ones who lead a prolonged period of poor quality life. And therefore, it is very, very important to focus and to emphasize that non-cancer conditions also require palliative care. Okay, so let's come to the assessment of breathlessness. So there are types of breathlessness, right? You have acute, acute and chronic. Now, it is important to know these things because usually it is the chronic breathlessness which comes to palliative care, because chronic breathlessness, like chronic pain, affects the quality of life and definitely impairs the person's perception of outward look for life. So how do you assess? There are various scales available: New York Heart Association for cardiac diseases, the Modified Medical Research Council for respiratory diseases, and the Borg scale, which is calculated in certain tests like the 6-minute walk test. So this is the New York Heart Association classification. You will get this in any textbook or internet, and also the slides, if you want to, Rajalakshmi will share it with you. But this is something that you need to know, that the Heart Association dyspnea classification is done by class 1 to class 4, where class 1 is dyspnea which is of extraordinary activity, and class 4 is dyspnea which is at rest or which happens more easily. The Modified Medical Research Council for breathlessness for respiratory conditions is grade, and grade it is 0 to 4. So there are 5 classifications, and you need to realize that this is slightly different. So when you talk about patients with lung conditions, you talk of MMRC. With heart, you do of New York Heart Association classification. Then when you are dealing with a patient of breathlessness, how will you evaluate? Most important is the history. So that itself gives you the direction, whether it is the heart, whether it is the lung, whether it is general deconditioning, or whether it is anxiety. So a detailed history and clinical examination is extremely important. Focusing on the lungs, it is important therefore to come to narrow down the etiology by doing a chest x-ray, simple first radiogram, then an electrocardiogram to be sure it's not the heart also. A pulmonary function test. Very often, this is not even utilized when you have diagnosing asthma and COPD. Please, in places available, please request for a pulmonary function test, and especially in patients with chronic lung diseases, try and request this once in 18 months. And you can plan it, the patient, even if the patient doesn't have it in his own area, rural area, please plan it in the district hospital. A pulmonary function test is extremely important, and you should request for a complete lung function with bronchodilator reversibility. Then you will also do a 2D echo, because most patients who have smoking related lung disease also can have smoking related cardiac diseases. So to be sure you're not missing out anything, you must order a 2D echo. And like I said, breathlessness can also be a big symptom in cardiac conditions. We can't afford to ignore or miss it. The other two important ones that we use for evaluation of breathlessness in respiratory medicine is high resolution CT scan or HRCT, which is basically a much more superior way of examining the lung with not just a chest X-ray. And lastly is the arterial blood gas, which tells us exactly whether there is type 1 respiratory failure, that is only low oxygen, or type 2 respiratory failure, that is low oxygen with high carbon dioxide. And that gives us a lot of information, because if the carbon dioxide is retained, that means the muscle is really, really weak. Second thing, you also remember that therapeutic changes happens with the high carbon dioxide, where we can use non-invasive ventilator like the BiPAP. So this is in brief of the evaluation that you will do if a patient comes with breathlessness. Now, when you talk of a patient with breathlessness, I don't know if anybody has seen or treated patients with asthma or chronic obstructive lung disease, especially those breathlessness which is chronic, which is day to day, which means patients are living with it for 5 years and 7 years. That is clearly something that needs addressing. So this definitely limits the activity of daily living. Patient is more and more dependent on the family for activities of daily living, like shower, like toilet, like walking from one room to the other. So this definitely affects the patient, and therefore there is a loss of role in that patient's life. And patients actually die a social isolation even before a physical death, because they're not able to go out of the house. Some people are housebound because of oxygen. Some people are housebound because of room bound because of the NIV. They're so breathless, so much of their lung is affected that they're not able to participate in small activities like having meals with family. So they have a social isolation, which leads to frustration, anger, depression, and also whenever you feel breathless, the anxiety factor is very high, and also is the fear of death. So this is important because it's not just the physical symptom of breathlessness, but so many things associated with breathlessness that makes the patient very, very desperate. So coming to this beautiful breathing, thinking, functioning model, which has been shown in various palliative care articles, is very, very important to understand what a chronically breathless patient feels, because of the fact that he has inefficient breathing and an increased work of breathing that leads to an increased respiratory rate. And he uses his axillary muscles of respiration, and therefore there is constant hyperinflation in the lung. So more and more of the lung is trapped in the lung, and less of the air is able to get out of the lung. When less and less air is able to get out of the lung, there is less and less air coming inside in the next breath, which leads to hyperinflation. Now, because of this, there is thoughts about dying, because he's sitting in the only thing that is active is his mind. So there is thoughts about dying. There is, attention to small things, memories, upset, anxiety, panic feeling. And because he is breathless, he is not able to do small, simple exercises. And because he doesn't do small, simple exercises, he loses his muscle power. So if you don't use it, you lose it. So more and more deconditioning happens. The more the patient doesn't walk, the more muscle loss, and the less even one step he takes, he's very, very breathless. So it's a vicious cycle that our patients with advanced lung diseases, advanced cancer, advanced heart disease get into, and therefore they lead into what we call as chronic breathlessness syndrome, which, like chronic pain, has been defined as a specific entity. Am I clear here? Everybody has understood?
Raju, can you check is everybody's understanding? You can see everyone together in your
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
So I'll continue. So please remember that this is a patient of ours. The need to address breathlessness is not just what makes him breathless, what relieves his breathlessness, and whether he's able to sleep, eat, but please ask patients about what they're thinking. Are they low in mood? Are they able to exercise? Are they doing their activities of daily living with some or full assistance? Because that will show us how bad the breathlessness is affecting his life. Okay, so that brings us to chronic breathlessness syndrome. It's a very interesting terminology, very, very important to remember. Just like chronic pain and how it can affect your life, chronic breathlessness also is defined as something that persists despite optimized evidence-based treatment. of underlying pathophysiology, which contributes to physical limitations or a variety of adverse psychosocial, emotional, and other consequences. And the duration of that is, it's not necessary to know the duration of that. To be honest with you, you need to realize that this is the definition of chronic breathlessness syndrome. So it's a person who is breathless for a varied period of time. That breathlessness actually contributes to physical limitations on adverse psychological, social, spiritual, and other consequences, and where optimum treatment for the underlying condition is already there, and still the person is constantly breathless, right? Okay, so it is important when you are dealing with a patient of chronic breathlessness to address his symptoms. And like I said, right at the history taking itself, you should be able to be clear in asking these questions and realizing that there's much more to the patient's symptoms than what he is talking. So you must counsel and explore the patient's beliefs and anxieties. Please reassure the patient realistically. There's no point giving him unrealistic hope, saying, no, no, don't worry, everything will be fine. That is not something that is true, and he knows it because he's experiencing the illness. Most important thing, like in our country, you can try some relaxation techniques, acupressure, acupuncture, yoga, pranayam, etc. And please take the help of the pulmonologist also, because certain conditions like interstitial lung, like COPD, they have bulle, and if you advise the patient to do Kapalbhati, he might end up in a pneumothorax. So please advise the patient physiotherapy and breathing techniques with consulting the physician or the respiratory physician. Then other simple non-pharmacological things that you can use is positioning. For example, some people feel better propped up. Some people feel better with putting their hands like this. So depending on what the patient is comfortable with, please go ahead and position the patient. Then give the patient a handwritten, almost like a step-by-step instruction for what he and the caregiver should do in an acute event. Blowing of fan through a handheld fan directly to the face, nose, and mouth has been proved very, very effective in the reduced sensation of breathlessness. So, especially when the patient is feeling acutely breathless, a chronic breathlessness patient, you can try the fan blowing method. It definitely eases the patient's sensation of increased breathlessness. When you I cannot emphasize more the need for rehabilitation. This helps in prevention of deconditioning of patients. So please advise patients to be as active as possible, either with oxygen, with a physiotherapist, with family members, graded simple exercises like even bending and stretching of the legs, of the arms, walking 5 steps, sitting 10 minutes, another walking. It's very, very important that patients use their muscles and be as active as possible. Also, patient support groups helps the patient a lot, because then he realizes he's not the only person with this illness suffering the way he is. So these are certain non-pharmacological things which can be actually tried anywhere by anybody. You don't need expert doctors, except for the fact of advising what kind of physiotherapy exercises will suit that particular patient. Coming to pharmacological, again, all of you are aware of this. For each individual respiratory condition, depending on the site of the illness, bronchodilators. So you have the beta-2 agonist, the long-acting beta-2 agonist, the muscarinic inhalers, the nebulizers, steroids in acute exacerbations, antibiotics in case of infection, antifibrotics in case of interstitial lung disease, and of course oxygen when you have proven it to be a hypoxemia associated breathlessness. Today we will focus on morphine, which is not taught to us in our MBBS curriculum, and is very, very important in the area of chronic breathlessness and palliative care. And of course, the other thing that you can use at home is the non-invasive ventilation, which is a ventilator attached like a mask, and that produces positive airway pressure, which helps the alveoli open up and improve the gas exchange. This is one step before intubation, which in patients with acute exacerbation of in a chronic advanced lung disease, invasive ventilation, intensive care is something which has a very, very poor outcome. These discussions need to take place much before the patient reaches the stage of the ICU. That's why we have capped it at non-invasive ventilation, because outcome of invasive ventilation in advanced lung diseases and patients with chronic breathlessness syndrome is very, very poor. So focusing on morphine, first of all, we are not aware of the pharmacodynamics of morphine. We are not taught the pharmacodynamics of morphine in undergraduates. What we know is all the side effects and the adverse drug reactions. But morphine is an extremely important medication, especially when we are not able to cure the underlying disease. So it's not used in acute events like pneumonia or acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. It is used in patients who fit under the definition of chronic breathlessness syndrome. And how does morphine work? It reduces the ventilated response to hypercapnia, that is high oxygen, hypoxia, and exercise. It decreases the sensation of breathlessness or dyspnea. So you must make it very, very clear that patients do not feel the underlying condition is not gone. And you are not treating the underlying condition. It's just that the patient feels less breathless. The doses we use are so small that we haven't seen respiratory depression. Pallium India will vouch for that, and deaths that often. So you have to be very, very cautious of how you use your morphine. You have to start low, go slow, and titrate as per the need, and slowly increase by 25% weekly to see the response. So you have to be in touch with the patient. You have to see the benefits of morphine for that particular patient. Not everybody will respond to morphine, but it is a wonder drug and it makes a huge difference in improving the quality of life of patients. You please must remember that when you prescribe morphine, you must prescribe laxatives, because morphine causes constipation even in that small dose, and patients with advanced lung diseases do not have the strength to push for opening bowel. So you must always prescribe laxatives along with morphine. So how do you use morphine? It's a simple algorithm. Again, these slides will be shared to you if you all need it. But remember that either you can use simple morphine, again given every 4 hourly, in orally or by subcute if your patient is not able to take orally. And we can also be given IV, but remember that morphine can be used at very, very small doses with other optimum treatment will be going on, like bronchodilators, like oxygen, like NIV. The rest will continue. And if you feel that there is anxiety, then you can add benzodiazepine like lorazepam. Or if there is panic, then you can add longer acting benzodiazepine or midazolam. Please remember that physiotherapy, relaxation, fresh air, all the non-pharmacological things must continue along with optimum medication that you see. So very often, including doctors and patients, feel that taking morphine is end of life, or that you can be allergic to it, or you can get addicted to it. I'm not still dying, and they feel that they are not in pain. Then why should we be given morphine? So there are a whole lot of myths which is related to morphine, and that we must address. First of all, healthcare professionals need to hear and learn more about morphine to use it effectively, safely, so that our patients benefit, especially at when they are in the palliative care stage. So a lot of literature is available about morphine. It has a statistically significant positive effect on the sensation of breathlessness. And also we must remember that oral or subcute morphine is way better than nebulized morphine. And no, we haven't experienced situations where we see a raise in carbon dioxide level, which very often pulmonologists feel that once you give morphine, it is going to happen. It is not seen. So there's a reference for it also on the slide. So coming to terminal breathlessness. So you have chronic breathlessness where the patient has experienced this for 3 years, 4 years, depending on the etiology. And you can use morphine orally, or you can use the combination of lorazepam or benzodiazepine if you see anxiety or panic. Pre-death, very often, a lot of patients, almost close to 90% of patients experience terminal breathlessness. And this can be very, very difficult for the patient's family to watch it. And it's a horrible experience for the patient himself if he's conscious. So you can use a combination of morphine and midazolam in a syringe driver wherever available and given subcutaneously, and slowly titrate the dose of the medication by 25 to 33% slowly over 24 hours. So another concept which I just want to introduce it is called as palliative sedation, which means that it is a concept where if you're not able to control or cure the patient's suffering during the end of life, you use a certain combination of medications with safe doses so that the patient becomes unaware of his symptoms and you're almost making the patient relaxed and sedating him. So the physician's responsibility towards hopelessly ill patients is palliative sedation. It is not to hasten death. So it's not used very often. It has to be used very, very carefully. A lot of conversations, documentation, signature, etc. has to be taken before you subject a patient to palliative sedation. And it's also medications which are given in the best interest of the patient. The intention is not to kill, the intention is to offer comfort. And usually, death comes in a few days, a few hours, or 1 or 2 days. It does not, palliative sedation is not used where the patient's prognosis is considered to be in weeks or months. So it is imminent death, and when the patient is signifying distress, is showing distressing symptoms, that is when you use palliative sedation. Okay, just a concept that you need to understand, because one of the things that always happens is that most patients, families, caregivers remember the last few hours of the way the patient suffered. In order to make that experience good and to make the patient transition into death much more comfortably, this has been tried a lot in the West. So again, this is midazolam, which I said you can use with when you have seen with anxiety, and you usually use in this dose of 2.5 to 5 milligrams subcut. It can be given along with morphine, and it can also be given as a part of palliative sedation. Okay. Other things, respiratory symptoms, which we see very often is secretions. So for respiratory secretions, we have two important drugs which can be given subcutaneously. One is hyoscine and second is glycopyrrolate. So you can use it in terminal secretions. But suppose you have a patient who has glaucoma or any other antipsychotics and any other anticholinergics, then you avoid using of hyoscine. But both these medications can be used to decrease the secretions. Very often we have seen that terminally ill patients or patients with stroke are given suction, and suction can be very, very traumatic. And there are patients of type 2 advanced lung diseases also with a lot of secretions who are awake and conscious, and still the suction is used. It is extremely painful for the patient. There is ulcers in the pharynx, and therefore we need to avoid and use low dose hyoscine and glycopyrrolate as described in the slide, so that patients' secretions are decreased and we don't need to use the suction. Then comes cough. Again, cough normally is a protective phenomenon, and when it becomes pathological, that is when the reflux is ineffective. It affects the patient's quality of life, affects the patient's sleep, work, and he's just not able to concentrate on anything, or it results in complications like cough syncope, cough incontinence, or fracture of the rib, etc. So not just patients with respiratory conditions, but even other patients with cancer, certain drugs, certain as people with reflux disease, so they also complain of chronic cough. And that, so coming to the causes, like I said, it could be respiratory, gastric, cardiac, drugs, radiation, especially of the lungs post breast cancer or lymphoma, etc. The patients can have a lot of cough, or those patients who are seeking attention, like psychogenic cough also is an important cause of repeated chronic intractable cough. So the types of cough, you have wet cough, where basically you need to realize that you can use nebulized saline or mucolytics like carbocysteine can be used. For dry cough, you need to target specifically depending on the etiology, and centrally acting cough suppression like codeine, opioids can also be used to treat cough. Other medications that have been tried is gabapentin. So what you can use is you can optimize all the inhalers. You can use the nebulizers if they're terminally ill. Opioids like breathlessness, small dose, start low, go slow, and also addition of anxiolytic if you feel there's a psychogenic cough. You can use small doses of diazepam, and for anxiety you can use citalopram 10 milligrams per orally. Codeine is another effective medication, but unfortunately, codeine is now not available in Bombay at least. Gabapentin, 300 milligrams 3 times a day or up to 600 milligrams 3 times a day can be used for intractable cough. Also, diazepam can be used in lung metastasis. So there are various drugs available, but again, you must explore the patient's beliefs, the fears, the anxieties before just writing prescriptions. Writing prescriptions is easy, but they might not just be the cough that's bothering them, but the fact that they're not able to sleep, the fact that they're worried about something else is what we need to address as palliative care physicians. Okay. Then coming to pleural effusion. So pleural effusions can be transudates and exudates. Pleural effusion can be seen from lung cancer metastasis or breast cancer metastasis, but it can also be other like bone, other organs also like ovaries, etc. can also present with malignant pleural effusions. The other causes of pleural effusions, of course, like TB or post pneumonia, trauma, embolus, ventilator associated injuries, and also certain drugs, but that's very, very rare. So the problem with pleural effusion is the quantity of pleural effusion. The more the fluid, the more the VQ mismatch, and therefore patients feel breathless. So especially in our palliative care setting, it's the malignant pleural effusion that we see very often. So we need to realize that we need to address the malignant pleural effusion by first decreasing the quantity. So how do we treat that? So this is just an academic interest of the color of the fluid and the apparent cause, which is not necessary for all of you. But if you like, again, there is slides will be shared. How do you manage the pleural effusion? Small effusions you can observe. If the patient is very, very advanced in his condition of the lung or the heart or the advanced cancer, then, and the patient's prognosis is only up less than 4 weeks, then you just do the aspiration till the time the patient is comfortable. But suppose the patient has a little better prognosis, so his performance scale is good, then you can put a small pigtail or a small intercostal drainage, and you can also attempt talc slurry, or what we call as pleurodesis, where we tap the patient dry, put in sterile talc, and cause acute inflammation the two pleural surfaces, so that the two pleural surfaces can adhere with each other and not have a potential space to fill the fluid. Suppose the patient's prognosis is even better than 4 weeks, and with a better performance status, you can actually do a surgical procedure and put thoracoscopic induced talc, where you're sure of where all you're putting the talc. And if it's a recurrent pleural effusion, then you can put a long-term indwelling catheter. So again, management, of course, malignant pleural effusions are the most complicated to manage, and it depends on the severity, the performance status of the patient, the response to systemic therapy, and response to drainage. So depending on how long the patient has to live, you can use simple aspiration to pigtailing to long-term intercostal drainage. Okay. Hemoptysis is another thing that we need to address because it's very common in the country. It can come even as a complication of tuberculosis, and the death is not just due to exsanguination or loss of blood, but also patient choking in his own blood. So 20% of lung cancer patients experience hemoptysis, and 3% of the fatal hemoptysis. Now, and it's very scary to see that quantity of blood. So the various interventions that are available today are radiotherapy, palliative external beam radiation, and also brachytherapy. For example, if there's an endobronchial lesion, you can actually do an endoscopy and burn that particular by laser, or inject medications to stop the bleeding from the endobronchial tumor. Cryotherapy, laser, and also bronchial artery embolization. These are all things which are, of course, available in big centers, not necessary in setups like in small rural areas. But what you can do in small rural areas is, first of all, support the patient, the family, because they are very, very petrified. It's not enough to say, don't worry. You must say things like, I can imagine you must be very concerned, and I will support you through this. So if there is a correctable thing, so you can use things like pause or tranexamic acid, and that can be used as 1.5 milligram stat and 1 gram TDS. You can give it an injectable. You can even do a bronchoscopy and inject inside the bronchus, so that there is a direct vasoconstriction and stopping of the bleeding. Okay. Then hiccups also can be actually hiccup comes more in the GI because it is a resultant of the acid reflux. but it's the contraction of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscle that results in the hiccup. So I have taken it here, and it is seen very rarely as an intractable condition, but most commonly it is due to gastric distension and reflux. So what you could do is an upper GI endoscopy, otherwise a CT abdomen thorax for a hiatus, etc. And how do you treat it? So you can decrease the gastric distension by antiflatulence or PPIs or prokinetics, so that the person doesn't suffer from reflux, or you can use central suppressants like baclofen. The other medications you can use is metoclopramide, and finally you can also use haloperidol and midazolam to track intractable hiccups. Okay, these are again some of the things that are available only in big centers. So the focus of this whole talk was to emphasize the need for palliative care in respiratory conditions, for palliative care not just in cancer conditions. Two, what are the symptoms that you will experience in a respiratory condition, so that you will get with a clear history taking, that whether it is related to respiratory, cardiac, deconditioning, anxiety, etc. Third, how do you ask the questions, how do you evaluate these patients, and how you will treat. And the importance is to recognize chronic breathlessness syndrome, because like chronic pain, it is something that must be addressed. It is not something which is just a physical symptom. It is something that we need to address as a psychosocial aspect, because patients suffer a lot due to this intractable symptom which is not even curable. So I'm happy for open for questions or case presentation. Please feel free if you have not understood anything.
Thank you so much, Raju. It was an elaborate presentation on almost all aspects of breathlessness. Even I could get a good revision of whatever was there in my head, and you covered so many things. So I think I also learned a lot from that.
You're, as always, you're very generously there.
So I would like to take some questions from the participants before moving on to presentation. Yes, Dr. Annette. Raju, can you unmute Dr. Annette? And
Yes,
you know,
Dr.
I get a lot of chronic asthmatics here in my OPD, and I use steroids because I don't have morphine, and I find steroids help. Can you give me some advice as to the use of steroids? I use prednisolone, and it helps them. Chronic asthmatics.
So asthma is a disease where there is chronic hypersensitivity of the airways. And asthma is a result of the inflammation of the airways. So steroids is life-saving in asthma. There's no doubt about that. So prednisolone is the preferred treatment. And only thing is, before starting using of prednisolone, there are a few things you should do. For example, if the patient is on inhalers, please check the technique of the inhalers. Two, please check if the patient is using inhalers with spacers or devices. Because very often patients just take the puff, and that really is not the way to deliver medication. So small, simple steps you really need to check before starting bisolone. One is whether the patient is taking inhalers. Two, the technique of the inhalers. Three, if the patient is constantly in the environment that is an allergic environment. So for example, if the patient, you can't hear?
No, can't hear.
You can't hear? Hello?
Doctor, we all can hear. Is the problem with your Dr. Annette? We can hear her clearly. Ma'am, can you remove your headset and see whether it is a problem with the headset?
Raju, I think she's not listening what you are telling. To remove the headset.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Dr. Annette. We can hear you clearly. Can you hear us?
I can't hear you. Yeah.
Raju, can you type in the chat session to remove? I've logged in from a mobile, so it's really difficult to type in the chat.
Okay, I will do that.
Any other question from others? Just keep it in your mind till we get to hear from.
Now, can you hear?
Dr. Anand, can you hear us now? Hello?
You're not here.
Ma'am, you, sorry.
I will probably type down the response to her question when we are sending the learning points.
Okay. So shall I continue, Sridevi?
Yeah, sure.
So, or she's trying one more time. Congratulations. We don't have a phone number.
Ma'am, I think we can take the next question, and meanwhile I will
Okay.
call her and clear it.
Okay,
I
fine.
think Dr. Veena had a question in between. Dr.
Sure.
Veena?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, regarding what Sister Anik asked only, the prednisolone is the good drug of choice, madam had told, but patient is diabetic. What's the restriction we should see?
So
ma'am?
see, prednisolone you can use if it is an airway disease. So asthma is an airway disease. Chronic obstructive lung disease, when it's an acute exacerbation, you can use it.
Okay, ma'am.
If it has to be given, it is life saving. At that time, you are not worried about diabetes. You can give insulin and control it. But chronic use of prednisolone is something, that is what I was trying to answer Dr. Annette, saying that you must check whether the patient is taking inhalers regularly, whether the patient is taking technique is correct. Third, whether the patient is being exposed to the allergic. What's the point if he's going to keep going back to the allergic? Then you keep giving him doses of steroids, which is dangerous. So that is important. Then third is you must start simple steps. So there are certain guidelines for using steroids constantly called the GINA guidelines. So if you Google search GINA guidelines, you get a step-by-step approach of which patients you should be using steroids regularly. Ideally, patients should be on inhalers in airway diseases and maximum bronchodilators like derifylin in the stage 3 or 4. Otherwise, most airway disease patients should be managed by inhalers. The role of prednisolone is only during acute exacerbation.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Veena. Dr. Annette, can you hear us now? Ma'am, can you unmute from your end and speak?
Yeah,
You can hear us right now, right?
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
So, Dr. Raja, we can answer her question now.
Yeah, so this is the same thing I was telling, that you need to check the inhalers, you need to check the technique, you need to check whether the patient is exposed to allergens. You can use steroids in the condition of an acute exacerbation, but you must be very cautious in using steroids for a chronic period of time.
Yeah.
Because in airway diseases, it is not indicated unless it is advanced COPD, where you still, now it has been come to the conclusion with lot of research that even in advanced COPD, only in acute exacerbations is a role of steroids. Other than that, role of steroids is mainly for asthma and airway diseases like bronchiectasis, etc. So it has to be short bursts of steroids, not long-term use of steroids like it was done in the past.
But suppose we use low dose, like 5 mg twice
That
a day.
is scary. Low dose steroids, the side effects is way more than short bursts of steroids over 8 or 9 days. Low dose steroids causes glycemic alterations, causes hypertension, causes glaucoma, causes the pituitary axis depression, and osteoporosis. So low dose, actually it is useless. You might as well give nebulizer, which makes a lot of sense, instead of giving low dose oral. Low dose oral has a lot of side effects. It's best to give it in the nebulized form.
Yeah, thank you.
There are
Madam,
few
hello,
questions in the
madam.
chat. Yeah.
Madam, whether morphine will produce respiratory depression in these patients previously?
The biggest reason for why morphine is not utilized in patients with chronic lung disease and chronic breathlessness is this fear. So first of all, like I told you, morphine has never been taught to us in undergraduates. Secondly, the doses we are using is very, very small. We start with 2.5 milligrams 12 hourly. Then slowly titrate. And in breathlessness, we hardly ever go beyond 20 to maximum 30 milligrams a day. It's not like pain where there is no ceiling of the dose. So if you use it safely, if you use it in small doses, if you escalate it slowly with response from the patient, so every 3 or 4 days or weekly, you get the response from the patient, see how the patient feels, and only then increase the dose. So small doses do not have any side effects. In fact, patients turn around and bless you that they were able to go to the toilet on their own first time in 2 years, or they're able to come to the dining table and eat with the family. It's a wonder drug, because you can't change the quality of the lung. At least you can change the quality of their life.
Thank you, madam.
So there is one question in the chat. I'll just read it out. For patients with valvular heart diseases and pulmonary hypertension, Dr. Punya, can you just, Dr. Punita, can you just tell what exactly you want to know in valvular heart disease and pulmonary hypertension? Are you asking about the use of?
Yes. Yeah. Use of morphine and for breathlessness due to pulmonary hypertension.
So
When
again,
they
the PPH, we need to evaluate if it's due to the valvular heart disease or it's primary pulmonary hypertension. So due to valvular heart disease, secondary pulmonary hypertension. You need to assess the level of pulmonary hypertension, because there are drugs available to treat pulmonary hypertension. So like Assurance, like Bosentan, like oxygen, there are various drugs that you can use to treat the pulmonary hypertension. Secondly, you have to evaluate the breathlessness. Is it due to the tight valvular lesion? Then it has to go through the cardiac surgeons, etc. Because if that can be replaced, then you don't need the morphine. You get what I'm saying? So unless it's PPH, and there is a role for breathlessness due to primary pulmonary hypertension that can be treated by PPH if all other avenues have failed. So if the patient cannot, then you can use low dose morphine just to evaluate the breathlessness. Control the sensation of breathlessness, not obviously to treat the pulmonary hypertension. But secondary pulmonary hypertension, you must treat the cause of the pulmonary hypertension to its maximum, like COPD, like ILD, like valvular heart disease. Morphine cannot be your first line of treatment. Morphine will come only if you have satisfied chronic breathlessness syndrome. You have to be sure that the patient is breathless on optimum other treatment, that patient's life is affected, his activity of daily life is affected, and that there is psychosocial and other elements also involved. So it's something that it has to obviously, it has to fit the definition of chronic breathlessness, and morphine is used completely to palliate the symptoms of breathlessness only.
Ma'am, is there any criteria, like for example, there was some post-op patient who was treated a replacement, mitral valve replacement was done. Still the pulmonary hypertension remained, and she was breathless for a long time, and she wouldn't get up and go to the toilet even. Always we have to either keep her on catheter.
It could also have been deconditioning. Because please remember, you and me today, if we have to run a marathon, we cannot get up and run 20 kilometers. We have to train. Correct? Because the body has to get conditioned for the running. Slowly you run 1 kilometer, then 2, then 5, then 10, then 20. So for these patients, when you are deconditioned for 6 months, 10 months, 2 years, because of the prior to the mitral valve treatment, they are not being conditioned to exercise. So it might not be symptoms of the heart. It could be deconditioned. So the evaluation is important. And therefore, post-op physiotherapy is very, very, very important. You need to assess with the physiotherapist's help. First, make him walk 5 steps, then 10 steps, then 15 steps. Slowly, graded exercises will improve. That's why, along with the lung and the heart, the biggest cause of breathlessness is also deconditioning. That's why, even if you have sometimes cancer of the ovary or cancer of the brain, patients are still breathless. That's the anorexia cachexia syndrome, because there's muscle loss. The diaphragm also becomes weak. It's a skeletal muscle. So you have to make, therefore, any surgery, the physio is as important as the surgery to get back to original quality of life.
Just to continue with the same topic. So, do you think till the patient getting that conditioning, would you recommend short-term use of opioids to cope better, or do
So
you
I
not?
think if the cause of the breathlessness is actually solved, like in that patient, the mitral valve, then I think you should focus on physio and counseling and this. But suppose the cause is not going to be solved, like COPDs, like ILDs, then yes, you should give opioids along with the physiotherapy.
Dr. Maheshwari, you have asked about COPD. Any advices pertaining to breathlessness in a COPD? Is there anything more that you want to know apart from
Is
the
it COPD
presentation?
or COVID patient?
Oh, sorry. Okay, I just okay. I took it as COPD. Okay.
No problem, no problem.
Go ahead. What is your question? Breathlessness in COVID.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
See,
Some
now
of them, they're asymptomatic.
Huh.
Asymptomatic, even when the saturation has seen like 70, 72, they're not showing any symptoms.
You know
So
the
that is a
reason,
bit
right?
scary.
No? The reason is the
Yes, ma'am. But
clots. P.
yes, ma'am.
P is opioids are not going to work in that kind of, because see, the biggest thing that opioids does is decreases the sensation of breathlessness. If the patient is not breathless, opioid is not going to do anything. You
Okay.
understand? We don't want to knock
Yes.
off the patient. The reason COVID patients are breathless, what we call as silent hypoxics or happy hypoxics,
Happy
is
hypoxia,
because
yeah.
of the clots, and the multiple clots are causing the VQ mismatch, and that is the reason why Clexane and the anti-clot mechanism is what is working. So in COVID
Okay.
patients, the breathlessness is because of VQ mismatch, because of the clots. It's an acute breathlessness.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Please remember that your morphine will have to fit under chronic breathlessness syndrome.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
So there was, I don't remember who did the presentation, and someone was mentioning that they do deal with a lot of occupational lung disease. I don't remember who was it who did a presentation on patient with breathlessness. Raju, do you remember? That time I told we'll wait for Rajam to come and answer those questions. It was all about dealing with the young patients with chronic breathlessness, especially associated with occupation, because they live near quarries or something. Someone was presenting. I don't remember who it was.
Sister Dr. Anishila Kaise presentation did COPD with
Yeah.
the acute access
Yeah.
suppression.
Yeah, exactly. So, if
So
there is
with
anything
occupational lung, it's a very different thing, because occupational lung is a preventable cause. I mean, if you're staying close by, then those people need to be given the compensation. It's a very different labor laws for occupational lung diseases. Plus, they need to have the protective gear. They should have got it in the first place, etc. And in this also, pulmonary rehab plays a big role. Eventually, the occupational lung disease becomes either a chronic obstructive lung disease or interstitial lung. So in those cases, when they become advanced, there is a role of morphine. But focus in occupational lung should be prevention, because this particular thing is going to cause it. The number of hours of the shift should be less. They should have protective gear. They should be told before joining this employment what they need to do to be safe, etc. And that's why occupational lung disease is a preventable issue. So that comes under the labor laws, and compensatory and all those things are different. But once they get the occupational lung disease, then it behaves either in an airway disease or an interstitial lung disease. And when they become advanced, then obviously you should treat them like any other COPD or any other ILD.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any more questions? So that day, I think they were mentioning mostly about as they work in a rural area, people find it difficult to come to the hospital just for using the nebulizers, and they remain in chronic breathlessness. And when the acute exacerbation happens, they come to these sister doctors and they give whatever treatment is available. And at some point, they are being referred to bigger hospitals, for which the patients are may not be ready to go because of the expense or distance or whatever reason. So at that time, I think I was mentioning about the use of morphine, at least so that they can go on with their activities of daily living. Yeah.
So,
No, that's it.
should I go ahead and answer?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, sure.
in a rural setting, again, it all depends on the cause of your breathlessness, so the diagnosis. So, if you have a patient with, say, asthma and COPD, it's very different, the behavior. I will still reiterate and focus on the fact that you really don't need nebulizers if you train your patients to use your inhalers with the spacers well. So, if you all look out at the website of breathefree.com, it's got video, it's got graphic representation of what you should be telling your patient. So, if you use appropriate inhalers in the right doses, with the right devices, in the right technique, your patients do not need nebulizer. I will tell you, in my 30 years of practice as a pulmonologist, I have used nebulizer only in the ICU for critically ill patients. Till then, it is the inhalers with the spacers. So that has to be effectively used. Then, of course, the next stage comes as bronchodilators like Derifylin retard in severe. So that also is a pill that the patient can take. The next step to that is, of course, prednisolone. Then infection. So, actually what we do when it comes to patients with airway disease, we have a plan for them. We tell them that if you have fever, yellow phlegm, then you take this antibiotic. But you have fever, suppose you have breathlessness, you've taken one inhaler, you've taken two inhaler, then you should take steroids and then you should report to the doctor. So we give them a step, or what we say, step-by-step treatment of when they need to do what at home, when they reach the nearby clinic, and when the nearby clinic should actually send them to the district hospital. So if you use your inhalers and the spacers effectively, it does way better than the nebulizer. Nebulizer just gives a higher dose in the aerosolized form. The same thing, if it is given properly at home by the patient, then you probably don't need to give nebulizers, and you don't need to stock nebulizers in every home of an asthmatic or an airway disease. So this actually is a separate topic on their own, but I'm happy to share references. But please check out breathefree.com website. All that you need to tell your breathless patient in early on asthmatics and COPD, it's all there in detail in that website.
Anything about the cost of inhalers? That is one other important thing everyone asks about.
Correct. So inhalers are not cheap, but if you tell the patients to buy one inhaler, it will last them for a month. So you can do the math by dividing. Second thing, nebulizers run on electricity. Even that is not cheap, and that's not there all the time. And buying a nebulizer and using it once in 6 months, it's again not cost effective. So you just need to buy the device once, and then you need to change the inhalers every 1.5 months. So actually it is more cost effective than coming to the clinic, wasting a day's wage, wasting time, standing in line, and all of that. And again, at this point, I will just like to take this opportunity. Again, I don't know if it's available in the rural areas, but if possible, your patients with airway disease, with occupational lung, with interstitial lung, should be given the flu and the pneumonia vaccine above the age of 65 for sure, or even above the age of 60, because that prevents the bacterial pneumonias as well as the flu. Now, of course, there's going to be another flu vaccine, this COVID business, but till now, whatever we have, H1N1 swine flu, there is a northern hemisphere quadrivalent flu vaccine available every year in India after the month of April. So you must vaccinate in those patients who can afford to.
The guidelines for using steroids, you mentioned GINA guidelines, right? GINA.
GINA.
GINA, okay.
GINA is for asthma.
Okay.
And gold is for
COPD. Yeah.
It's all available on the net.
Everyone will be familiar with the gold for COPD. We can take one more question if there is any, or we can move on to the presentation.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Ma'am, regarding the material of that spaces, once I asked, like, is it like some of them were telling like at Cipla and all those, they have that plastic wala, this thing that have less efficacy. A lot many particles will be sticking to the sides, and stainless steel is better. Is it like that, ma'am?
So now we have a transparent VT spacer. Transparent VT spacer, which is a mini spacer.
Okay.
So that's what we use. It has got less, the particles stick less to the side.
Okay.
And it's a smaller one. It's easy to carry. Again, everything is there in breathe3.com.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Raju, can we start with the presentation?
Sure, ma'am.
Just one more question Dr. Kavita has asked in the chat. Do the vaccine has to be repeated yearly?
Flu vaccine, yes. Pneumonia vaccine, no. So annual flu and once in a lifetime. There are two pneumonia vaccines, Pneumo 23 and Prevenar 13. This is once in a lifetime. If you are more affording patients, then there's also a vaccine for herpes zoster, which can be given once in a lifetime.
Okay, thank you.
Today's case presentation will be taken by Dr. Jacinta. Dr. Jacinta, can you unmute yourself and start your presentation? Dr. Jacinta?
Hello?
Dr. Jacinta, can you hear us?
Please remove headset.
Can you remove the headset of yours and speak? Ma'am, unplug from your laptop or phone. That headset should be unplugged from your phone or headset. Hello, doctor, can you speak now? We can't hear you, ma'am. Doctor, we can't hear you. Is the headset unplugged from your phone? No, ma'am, we can't hear you. Ma'am, can you rejoin again? I don't know what is the problem there. Remove the headset from your phone and then rejoin again. Re-log in again.
She's not using headphone, right? I can't see any headphone.
But I don't know, ma'am, whether it is unplugged from the phone
Okay.
or not. Dr. Jacinda, can you re-log in again after removing the headset to the same meeting? We can't hear you, ma'am.
Or should someone read the slides, and by the time she negotiate joining in back, by the time maybe Vishnu can call her and talk.
Okay, ma'am, you can start reading it. I will talk to her and I will be back.
Yeah. So this is a this is a 54-year-old female, diagnosis chronic bronchitis, diabetes mellitus type 2, and PUS. I didn't understand what it is PUS, but yeah. Next slide. Presenting complaints: severe breathing difficulty and cough and pain abdomen. Next slide. The patient is 54 years old, married lady from village Kulukera, Palkot district, Gamla. Family history: she has 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. Her eldest daughter is married recently and the rest are studying. At home, she lives with her husband and father-in-law. The children are looked after by their aunt, husband's unmarried sister, who is a nurse. Her husband is a farmer and they live on the produce of the fields. She is suffering from breathlessness and cough on and off since 20 years, was treated locally but did not get any relief. Diabetes was detected in 2018. Since then, she is under medication. Next slide. She developed breathlessness 20 years ago when her youngest son was born. When he was 4 years old, 4 days old, she ate ripe jackfruit and used cold water for washing and drinking, and there was no one at home to help her out. The whole village started giving remarks that she will get cold and become sick. There is much superstition in the village. Because of this, people remarked her so much that she got frightened and started with breathing difficulty. This was purely psychosomatic and she didn't go for treatment and the symptoms continued. During each childbirth, she could rest only for 6 days and thereafter started doing all the household works. At home, there were only 3 people, both couple and father-in-law. So she had to do all the works alone and manage the whole house. Her husband is a drunkard. When drunk, he does not help her at all. On those days, there is quarrel between them. She used to get irritated, tensed, and palpitation. Next slide. Out of anger, she started taking tobacco and rice beer in regular basis. This was the cause for her to develop PUS. And in the year 2018, she became diabetic. Her unmarried sister-in-law took both the girls and son and took care of them as they grew up. There is no family history of bronchial asthma or diabetes. On examination, patient was in distress, breathless, bilateral wheeze, and had tachycardia. Next. Investigations, total count is 8,750, HB10, FBS 358, postprandial 499, urine sugar positive, and X-ray chest within normal limit. So there is superstition in the society and family, no one to accompany. Husband is selfish and drunkard. No help from others when in need during delivery. Depression, loneliness led to addiction of liquor and drugs, and no reliance on God. Medications: nebulizer, steam inhalation, injection deriferinstat, injection dexamethasone, amoxicillin injection, cetirizine, tab derifilin, glyconil, omeprazole, OD, and B complex. Next slide. So main concerns are support to the patient, accompany her in her loneliness, reach out to the family members, and assurance of our prayerful support. Next slide. So this is a 54-year-old female with a husband and 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy, and living with the father-in-law, suffering from chronic bronchitis, PUS, diabetes type 2, patient under maintenance therapy, and living in a very superstitious social environment.
Dr. Jacinta, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we can hear you too, ma'am.
Yeah. So I read till summary. Is there any more slide?
Only the discussion points left.
Yeah. So that you can read. Over to you.
Okay. How can one help this patient to restore her emotional health? First question. Shall I read all the three?
Yeah, sure.
Number 2, what is the right approach to get the family members support her so that she feels accepted and psychologically balanced? Is there any possibility to help her husband? That's my question.
So thank you very much, Dr. Jacinta. It must be extremely difficult to work in these kind of situations and to deal with these kind of people with superstition, lack of education. But I think to answer your first question, how can you help this patient to restore emotional health? I think the first thing is the physical health. So we need to make her physically strong. And that it will come from proper history taking and proper evaluation, because chronic breathlessness 20 years ago, jackfruit and all that is probably definitely superstition. But from the history, it seems like an asthma, because 20 years ago means she was about 30.
Yeah.
So at 30 years, and especially you're saying breathlessness on and off, only asthma has on and off symptoms.
Yeah.
You know, you have episodes and then you have episodes of normalcy and then you have again an episode. So if it's a poorly treated asthma, all that treatment that was, can we go to that treatment slide? That is completely inadequate. Yeah, the next one. See, nebulization is okay. Like I said, if you try the inhalers regularly. So she's on injection derifylin stat and derifylin tablet. So this prescription is a big question mark. Cetirizine has no role in asthma. It's an allergic response, but it does not do anything to allergic bronchitis. So first of all, we need to treat her physical symptoms properly. So for this lady who's had 20 years symptoms of problem, if you change your lung function test, that will be great. I know it's not possible, but if it's not, she needs to be on the right medications. And the right medications is a combination of a long-acting beta-2 agonist along with the steroid like Foracort, through a meter-dose inhaler and a spacer. Along with that, she should be on a Aerocort for rescue medication with tab derifylin retard, so that she has a 24-hour action, with antibiotics only if there is infection, and obviously breathing exercise, etc. And then you step up to oral steroids. So, and obviously control of diabetes, exercise, diet, a whole lot of things. So first we need to improve her physical health before even talking to her about her emotional health. Because if you are going to have so many physical ailments, you're going to be very, very emotionally labile. So first is address the physical health. Then, of course, explore what her fears, anxiety, equations with the family members, why she started taking beer, and that tobacco is terrible for her asthma. So those kind of things we need to address. First, make her physically strong. Then explore her emotions. Then ask her permission to speak to the family members, whether she really has an equation with her husband, whether what she would like us to help, how she would like us to intervene and bring the family together to support her. Sridevi, you want to add something?
No, I was thinking the same thing to optimize the physical, the medications found to be really inadequate, especially with start doses. And what about the feasibility of whatever we have discussed, Dr. Jacinta? Can you arrange for a pulmonary function test?
No, it is not possible. I'm in very rural area. There is no question of pulmonary test. For that, I have to send them to Ranchi, to the town.
How far is that?
100 kilometers.
And do they go to Ranchi for anything at all?
These people will not go because they are in the village, in very interior village.
Okay. Now, another way to do is we have lots of portable small lung function machines. Lots. Yeah. These days, a lot is available on the market. So you can keep one small one in the clinic. Or you can keep a peak flow meter and a small lung function. They are not expensive, they're not complicated, especially in such difficult patients. See, because you need to educate her about the fact that her lungs are weak. And sometimes numbers help. Saying, ये 20 में है, आपको 200 में लेके आना है. So at least you know that there is something to work towards. So if you get a peak flow meter, I'll send what it means. Peak flow meter, you can see it on the web. It costs 500 rupees. Peak flow meter. And you get simple handheld lung function machines.
Yeah.
So that you can do. You don't need to do. You have to do it only once a year for every patient.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And what else can? What else? What help can we give to her?
So I think first is medication. Second
Medication.
is ask her what her problem with the family is. Because she is your focus, right? She should tell you who's the one who's the problematic. Because she's the one who's taking tobacco. You have to actively tell her to stop using tobacco. It's only going to worsen the lungs.
Yeah.
She's got addicted to this whatever rice beer. So obviously, if it calms her, she should probably take it much lesser than what she is. Thirdly, her children have gone away from her because she's not even able to look after them.
Yeah.
That must be causing an emotional, lots of emotional distress.
Yes.
So it's not, we have to make her realize that it's not everybody else's fault. She has to be physically well to look after her children, to not be addicted, to be responsible for them. Then many things will fall into place. If she's physically fit, she'll obviously be able to do the housework. Though 6-day rest post delivery is something that is not acceptable. You know, so those are the things we can talk to the family about. But first, we need to address her. She has a lot of issues, and take her permission to find out where the problem is, and take her help to address those issues. Because outsiders will not be accepted that easily either.
No.
So we go through her, ask her problem, then speak to the husband and the father-in-law. See, father-in-law also must be much older and very difficult to convince.
Yeah.
But I think the approach has to be much more emotional rather than clinical.
Yeah. Because every time she is disturbed in the family, she gets the attack of asthma.
No, that's what I'm saying. So she needs to be on something on a regular basis. This is our SOS medications. See, this is the biggest problem with treating asthma. People take treatment only when they're symptomatic. The underlying inflammation is there throughout.
Yeah.
That is why you need inhalers, low dose throughout.
Yeah.
But that depends on the type of asthma, whether it's chronic persistent asthma, whether it's intermittent asthma. So that is what your lung function and your peak flow meter will show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very practical advice to buy cheaper equipments, because most of these doctors are practicing in rural areas where they find
and
it
they're
very
not
difficult to
expensive,
transport.
and they're easy to do. You just have to understand how the patient has to blow. Get a printout. You can stick that printout in the patient's file, and you do it once a year. So you know exactly that this patient is deteriorating. Its peak flow meter is actually like a thermometer for fever. The more you blow, the better your lungs are. So you have exact, suppose the patient is blown 500 today and he's come back after say 2 months with 200, you know how bad he is. So, in this country, we can't, 500 rupees is something we can all keep in this thing with mouthpieces, which are paper, which you can throw, so that you don't use the same mouthpiece for every patient.
Yeah.
And maybe focusing a little bit on pulmonary rehabilitation, exercises or stuff
So pulmonary rehab, it need not be very fancy. The way I tell my patients is just simple exercises. If the patient is sitting down watching TV or sitting down listening to somebody talk, movement of head. See, all your muscles of respiration use the shoulder as the fulcrum. So you need to strengthen the upper limb. So upper limb exercises, move of hand, shoulder joint, put the hand against the wall and press, breathing exercises, just simple walking. It's a good exercise overall. I know these rural people do a lot of walking, but obviously they cannot be doing the walking when they're not well. So any kind of exercise will do, walking, cycling, swimming, all these are excellent exercises, but particular focus should be for upper limb and for breathing exercises.
So, thank you, ma'am.
Any other
Any other
concerns or
questions?
questions?
Yeah, any other questions from any of the participants?
Dr. Prema has raised her hand. Dr. Prema, did you have a question? Dr. Prema, did you have a
Doctor,
question?
can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. You can ask your question.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me, doctor?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Hello, Dr. Prema, we can hear you. You can speak, ma'am.
Okay. I just want to know now during this COVID time, see many patients who are on inhalers, they're not able to reach the health centers. Then for the time period, at least we can put them on tablet Derifylin. Would you say something about it?
So see, according to the guidelines, you use tablets only if optimum inhalers have failed to work. And you have to continue with the increased dose of inhalers. Ideally, do not use Derifylin 3 times a day. Please use Derifylin retard.
Derifylin 3 times a day?
Do not use Derifylin 3 times a day. Use Derifylin retard.
Yeah. That is what you're using. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and Derifylin retard needs to be all. Don't give too high doses, especially if patients have cardiac problems, and that will also get to this. So 150 milligram twice a day is enough to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Don't go to some patients take 400 BD and all. That's too much.
There is Derifylin M with Montelukast.
Montelukast is a total pharmacological hype and complete useless in airway diseases.
Madam, why they haven't given insulin? The sugar level is very high, 300 and 400. So whether it is a rural area, she has given oral hypoglycemic agent. I think it's better to give start on insulin and all these things for this patient.
I think the diet and the stress should be controlled first. That automatically will decrease the sugars also. Because I'm sure they do enough exercise in the rural areas. But no, we have to inquire about what she eats. Is rice a staple diet? Then quantity of rice that she's eating, what the stress levels, the lack of sleep, all this. And she's also drinking rice beer, which also might be having high glucose intake. So diet needs to be addressed first. Because insulin is a way of life, you can't just put the patient on insulin. Then there's monitoring, then there's, how much she's taking, then hypoglycemia. So much is going on. Sterility, how clean is she keeping, how clean is her house. So you need to be very sure about the other factors that you can have control over.
Raju, Dr. Lalita is telling to unmute her. I think she is not able to unmute her. Can you do it from your side? I got a message in the chat.
Dr. Lalita? Dr. Lalita?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
My video is disabled by you. It's coming disabled by the host, my video.
Okay, ma'am, I understand. Ma'am, were you moving with the phone somewhere, or we could see the ceiling only? In such cases, we used to disable the video, ma'am.
Now I am alone, ma'am. I had somebody, but I am alone now.
Okay, ma'am. So, ma'am, you had any question to ask now?
No, not now. No. I lost the chance actually. I was lifting. Okay, ma'am, just unmute it enough.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Raju, there is one question in the chat session. I'll just read it. It's very difficult to negotiate with the phone. Okay, regarding glycopyrrolate and hyoscine dose and contraindications, is dynamic hyperinflation seen in non-COPD breathless patients too?
Yeah, so COPD, non-COPD patients also, if they end up taking, if there's air trapping, then there's definitely hyperinflation. So chronic advanced asthmatics will have hyperinflation. So it's not seen in all breathless patients. And I will share the dose of glycopyrrolate and hyoscine in the proper algorithm and send it. It's there on that slide, but I will just make it a bit more legible and send it to you. But it's very easy. You can use it SOS, or you can use it 3 times a day. You start with a low dose of 2.5, and there are no major contraindications. One of the contraindications is dryness. So you have to, therefore, it's better to give it on need basis.
Forgot to ask, what was PUS? I didn't get it. If anyone understood what PUS is, please tell me. In the case presentation, in the first slide I have seen in the diagnosis.
Jacinda can tell now. She gave the diagnosis. Sister Dr. Jacinda, she has given the diagnosis: chronic bronchitis, diabetes, and PUS.
It is peptic ulcer syndrome.
Oh,
okay.
And darifilin causes acidity, yeah? So that will rupture the peptic ulcer also. So you should be very, very careful as to what we are giving, the combination of doses. So basically, if you read the 2 guidelines for GINA and GOLD, you know automatically what is the optimum treatment that your asthmatic and COPD should be on. Then you have a step ladder treatment to increase it. And ideally, all the guidelines will give you treatment as per the PFT. So it's worthwhile by uncomplicated lung function machine and a peak flow meter for your clinics, because then you treat your breathlessness patients better.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the discussion. And I think today was an excellent session. We got a lot of information.
And I'm happy to take something only on asthma and only on COPD, because I see that there are a lot of questions, and naturally so.
And yeah, many of them work in places where they meet a lot of patients with chronic trouble.
Correct. So
yeah,
even
we can
simple.
Look for that. If you have any interest, just write to us so that we can do a separate session apart from the chai schedule. We can meet one day and discuss about it.
Happy to do that.
Madam, in our schedule, we have missed one class now, dementia and all.
There are more sessions coming. We have session on delirium. We have sessions, a lot of sessions coming. So according to the availability of faculty, we have shuffled a little bit because of this COVID issue. Most of them are involved in many webinars and Zoom meetings. So it's very difficult to arrange.
Okay.
That will be coming. We'll cover everything which is mentioned in the schedule.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rajan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all.
I really wanted you to come in for the respiratory symptoms because I knew that there will be a lot of questions you will be able to answer, and
No
some
problem.
remedies like the peak flow meter and the cheaper versions that you only will be able to tell them. Thank you so much.
Thank
for taking
you.
time and effort.
Thank you. Thank you, Sridevi, Rajalakshmi, and all participants. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Rajam. So I like every participant to stay for a couple of minutes too. Please do the feedback which we have shared now. So please do this and then only leave the meeting. So this is the only way we could get your feedback now. There is no link now. So please do attend this feedback before you leave the meeting. So about all the learning materials, I will make sure that it will reach you by tomorrow itself.